The clock on the wall of Lincoln Elementary ticked past 6:30. Most teachers had fled hours ago, eager to escape the fluorescent-lit corridors that smelled of disinfectant and childhood chaos. I remained at my desk, red pen in hand, marking spelling tests that would be forgotten by Monday morning. 26 papers. 26 futures I was supposedly shaping on a salary that barely covered my studio apartment rent. Mary Prosper, 26 years old, orphaned at 18. Still paying off student loans that felt more like shackles with each passing month. The arithmetic was simple. Devastating, but simple. My phone buzzed against the scarred wooden surface of my desk. A text from my landlord. Rent increase notice attached. My stomach dropped. Familiar dread settling in my chest like sediment in still water. I closed my eyes, counted to 10, then gathered the unfinished papers into my worn leather bag. The building would be locked soon, and I had a bus to catch. Except I didn't. The last Route 47 bus pulled away from the curb as I reached the stop, its diesel exhaust mixing with October's bitter air. I watched the red taillights disappear into traffic, carrying with them my last hope of avoiding the 8-block walk through neighborhoods that grew progressively worse with each street. The first drops of rain hit my face as I turned onto Maple Street. Then more. Within minutes, the drizzle transformed into a steady downpour that soaked through my discount coat and turned my carefully styled hair into limp strands. I clutched my bag tighter, quickening my pace past boarded storefronts and apartments with broken security lights. That's when I heard it, crying. Not the angry wail of a tantrum, but the broken, hiccuping sobs of genuine terror. The sound cut through the rhythm of raindrops on concrete, pulling me toward a narrow alley between two condemned buildings. I should have kept walking. Should have minded my own business in a neighborhood where survival meant selective blindness. But 8 years of teaching had rewired my instincts. When a child cried, I responded. The boy sat huddled against a dumpster, small body shaking from cold and fear. 6 years old, maybe 7. Dark hair plastered to his skull, clothes expensive but soaked through. He looked up as my shadow fell across him, eyes wide and impossibly blue, like pieces of winter sky. "Hey, sweetie," I whispered, crouching down despite the puddle seeping through my cheap flats. "What's wrong? Where are your parents?" He flinched away from my outstretched hand, pressing himself deeper into the shadows. "I got lost," he sobbed. "Bad men were chasing Papa and I ran, and I don't know where I am, and my GPS watch is broken, and Papa can't find me now." My heart constricted. I glanced at the small device on his wrist, clearly expensive, its screen dark and lifeless from water damage. No child should know what it felt like to run from dangerous men. No child should speak of such things with the matter-of-fact terror I heard in his voice. "What's your name?" I asked gently. "Luca." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "Luca Agostini, Italian." The surname meant nothing to me then, just syllables that rolled beautifully off a frightened child's tongue. "I'm Mary. I'm a teacher. Would you like to come to my apartment where it's warm and dry? We can call someone to help find your Papa." He studied my face with an intensity that seemed too old for his years. Whatever he saw there must have reassured him, because he nodded, allowing me to help him stand on unsteady legs. My apartment was a 12-minute walk that felt like an hour. Luca stayed close, his small hand gripping mine with surprising strength. I kept glancing over my shoulder, hyper-aware of every shadow, every sound that wasn't our footsteps on wet pavement. His fear was contagious, settling into my bones like winter cold. The building's lobby smelled of mildew and old cigarettes, but it was warm. Luca's shivering intensified as we climbed the 3 flights to my floor, his body finally registering safety enough to acknowledge how cold he'd become. Inside my tiny studio, I cranked the ancient radiator and found him dry clothes. A oversized sweater that hung past his knees, sweatpants that needed rolling up multiple times. He looked fragile in the oversized garments, like a little ghost haunting my space. "Are you hungry?" I asked, already moving toward my cupboards. He nodded, settling onto my second-hand couch with careful precision. I heated canned soup on my single burner, while he examined my apartment with curious eyes. Books everywhere, stacked on surfaces and filling improvised shelves made from milk crates. Student artwork taped to walls. A life that was humble, but full of small beauties. "You really are a teacher," he said, pointing to a photo of my second-grade class from last year. "I really am." I handed him a mug of tomato soup, watching him wrap small fingers around the ceramic for warmth. "Now, about calling someone. Do you know your papa's phone number?" His face crumpled. "I can't call the police. Papa said bad men might be listening. They were trying to hurt him today, and I got scared and ran." His voice broke on the last word. I set down my own mug, processing this information. What kind of life was this child living? What kind of danger was his father involved in that police couldn't be trusted? "Okay," I said slowly. "No police tonight. But your papa must be worried sick. Is there anyone else we could call?" Luca shook his head, eyelids growing heavy as warmth and food worked their magic. "Papa always finds me. The watch tells him where I am, but it's broken now." He touched the useless device sadly. "Then we'll wait," I decided. "If your papa is as good at finding you as you say, maybe he'll figure out where you are." I tucked him under my grandmother's quilt, the only valuable thing I owned. He was asleep within minutes, chest rising and falling with the even rhythm of exhausted childhood. I watched him for a while. This beautiful, mysterious boy who'd stumbled into my ordinary life, carrying secrets too heavy for his small shoulders. Outside, night deepened. I graded papers at my kitchen table, glancing periodically at my sleeping houseguest. Around midnight, I noticed the cars. Black sedans, expensive and gleaming despite the persistent drizzle. They appeared silently, taking positions around my building like chess pieces claiming territory. No one got out. Engines remained running, exhaust visible in the cold air. I backed away from the window, pulse quickening. This couldn't be coincidence. Somehow, impossibly, they'd found us. I checked the locks on my door, then checked them again. The deadbolt that had always seemed adequate now felt flimsy as paper. Luca slept on, oblivious to the danger gathering outside like storm clouds. I made coffee with shaking hands, knowing sleep wouldn't come. Whatever world this child belonged to was closing in around my tiny apartment, and I had no idea what dawn would bring. The cars waited, patient as predators. And I waited too, guardian to a boy whose father commanded enough power to mobilize an army in the middle of the night. A father who might be savior or monster, or something more complicated than either. Morning would bring answers I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. The knock came at 7:15, sharp and authoritative. 3 measured raps that seemed to vibrate through my entire apartment, followed by silence that felt like held breath. Luca stirred on the couch, those impossibly blue eyes fluttering open as consciousness returned along with memory. "Papa," he whispered, hope and uncertainty warring in his small voice. I pressed my finger to my lips, motioning for him to stay quiet. Through the peephole, I saw 2 men in expensive suits standing in my hallway. Not police. Something else entirely. Something that made my skin crawl with primitive warning signals I couldn't name. The knock repeated. Louder this time. More insistent. "Miss, we know you're in there," a voice called through the door, heavily accented. Italian, like Luca's surname. "We're looking for the boy." Luca's face went pale, but he didn't look terrified. He looked conflicted, like he recognized something in that voice that wasn't entirely threatening. "Stay here," I mouthed, then called through the door. "Who are you? What do you want?" "Friends of the family. The boy's father sent us." I looked back at Luca, who was now sitting upright, clutching my grandmother's quilt to his chest. "Is it safe?" I whispered. He nodded slowly. I think that's Uncle Tony. Uncle Tony. A name that should have been reassuring, but somehow wasn't. Not when it came attached to men who moved through my neighborhood like sharks through shallow water. Against every instinct screaming at me to keep that door locked, I turned the deadbolt. The door swung open to reveal 2 men who looked like they'd stepped out of a movie about organized crime. The first was older, maybe 50, with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much. The second was younger, but carried himself with the same predatory awareness, hand resting casually inside his jacket in a way that suggested hidden weapons. "Miss," the older one spoke first, eyebrows raised in polite inquiry. "Prosper, Mary Prosper. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Miss Prosper, I'm Antonio Ricci." He gestured to his companion. "This is Enzo Moretti. We're here for Luca." Before I could respond, small feet pattered across my floor. "Uncle Tony!" Luca launched himself at the older man, who caught him in arms that were surprisingly gentle for someone who radiated such controlled danger. "Hey there, little man," Antonio murmured, relief evident in his voice as he held Luca tight. "Your papa's been worried sick. We've been looking for you all night." "I got scared," Luca said, his voice muffled against Antonio's shoulder. "The bad men came and Papa told me to run, and I did, but then I got lost and it was raining and my watch broke and then the nice teacher lady found me." Antonio's eyes moved to me over Luca's head, assessing, calculating. I felt exposed under that gaze, like he could read my entire life story in the nervous way I clutched my robe closed, in the humble surroundings of my tiny apartment, in the stack of unpaid bills sitting on my kitchen counter. "Miss Prosper," he said formally, "Luca's father would like to thank you personally for keeping his son safe." That's when the footsteps sounded in the hallway, slower than the others had been, more deliberate. Each step seemed to echo with authority that made both Antonio and Enzo straighten slightly, defer without conscious thought. And then he appeared in my doorway. Riccardo Agostini was not what I had expected from the father of a 6-year-old boy. He was younger than Antonio, maybe late 30s, with the kind of presence that seemed to alter the very air pressure in a room. Dark hair showed threads of silver at the temples, and his eyes were the same startling blue as his son's, but harder, colder. Eyes that had seen violence and hadn't just survived it but wielded it. He wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, tailored to accommodate what was clearly an athletic build beneath the expensive fabric. A scar ran along his left temple, thin and precise, like someone had tried to write their signature on his face with a blade. But it was his stillness that truly unsettled me. He didn't fidget or pace or show any of the nervous energy I would have expected from a father who'd spent the night searching for his missing child. He simply stood there, taking in every detail of my apartment, of me, of the situation, processing information with the calculating patience of an apex predator. "Papa!" Luca wiggled out of Antonio's arms and ran to his father, who caught him and lifted him effortlessly, some of the hardness leaving his features as he held his son. "Are you hurt?" Riccardo's voice was deep, with just a trace of accent coloring the words. His hands moved over Luca with surprising gentleness, checking for injuries with the thoroughness of someone who had reason to expect them. "No, Papa. The teacher lady took good care of me. She gave me soup and let me sleep on her couch, and she has lots of books, and she didn't call the police like you said not to." Those piercing blue eyes moved to me then, and I felt pinned under his stare like a butterfly on a specimen board. He studied my face with an intensity that made heat creep up my neck, cataloging features, expressions, probably deciding whether I was threat or opportunity, or something else entirely. "Miss Prosper," he said finally, my name sounding different in his mouth than it had in Antonio's. Softer somehow, more personal. "I'm Riccardo Agostini, Luca's father." I nodded, not trusting my voice. This close, I could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated that mixed with the underlying scent of power and barely controlled violence. "I'm grateful," he continued, shifting Luca to one arm while reaching into his jacket. I tensed, but what emerged was a leather wallet, not a weapon. "For your kindness to my son. Please, allow me to compensate you for the inconvenience." He pulled out a roll of bills that looked thick enough to solve several of my more pressing financial problems. The money sat in his outstretched hand like a test, like he was waiting to see what kind of person I really was. "I don't want your money," I said, the words coming out sharper than I'd intended. "He's just a child. Anyone would have done the same thing." Something flickered across Riccardo's face. Surprise, maybe, or approval. It was gone too quickly for me to be sure. "Not anyone," he said quietly. "Most people in this neighborhood would have minded their own business, or called the police despite his protests. You didn't. Why?" I looked at Luca, who was watching our exchange with curious eyes, then back at his father. "Because he was scared. Because he's 6 years old and was alone in the rain. Because that's what decent people do." Riccardo studied me for another long moment, then tucked the money back into his jacket. Instead, he pulled out a business card, heavy cream cardstock with elegant embossed lettering. "My contact information," he said, holding it out to me. "If you ever need anything at all, day or night." I took the card with fingers that trembled slightly. The paper was warm from being close to his body, and I could feel the weight of the promise it represented. Favors from men like Riccardo Agostini didn't come free, and they always came with strings attached. "Thank you," I managed. "For taking care of him." "Thank you," he corrected. "For taking care of him first." He settled Luca more securely in his arms and turned to go, Antonio and Enzo flanking him like an honor guard. At the doorway, he paused and looked back at me one more time. "Miss Prosper?" he said, voice carrying a weight I couldn't interpret. "If you change your mind about the compensation, or if you need anything else, don't hesitate to call." And then they were gone, disappearing into the hallway with the same silent efficiency they'd used to arrive. I stood in my doorway until I heard the building's front door close, then rushed to my window to watch them leave. 3 black cars waited at the curb, engines running. Riccardo slid into the back of the middle vehicle with Luca, while Antonio and Enzo took the lead car. Within seconds, the convoy pulled away from the curb and disappeared into morning traffic, leaving no evidence they'd ever been there except for the business card in my hand and the lingering scent of expensive cologne in my apartment. I sank onto my couch, fingers shaking as I examined the card. Riccardo Agostini. No title, no company name. Just a name and a phone number embossed in dark ink. That's when curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my laptop and typed his name into the search engine. The results made my blood run cold. 2 weeks had passed since that morning encounter, and I'd almost convinced myself it had been some kind of fever dream. Almost. If not for the business card tucked between the pages of my worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, I might have succeeded in filing the entire experience under things too dangerous to think about. The flowers arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was refereeing a disagreement between 2 third-graders over a box of crayons. Mrs. Henderson from the main office appeared in my classroom doorway, looking flustered and holding an arrangement that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "These are for you, Mary," she said, unable to hide her curiosity. The delivery man was very specific, had to sign for them and everything. 2 dozen white roses, perfect and pristine, nestled in tissue paper so crisp it crackled when I touched it. The card was cream-colored cardstock. Expensive, with elegant script that matched the business card hidden in my apartment. "Miss Prosper, I would be honored if you would join me for dinner tonight. 7 o'clock. Venetian room at the Fairmont Hotel. R.A." My hands trembled slightly as I read it. The Fairmont. I'd walked past that hotel countless times on my way to my second job at the campus bookstore, but I'd never imagined actually setting foot inside. Places like that were for people who lived in different worlds than mine. People like Riccardo Agostini. Secret admirer? Mrs. Henderson's voice was carefully casual, but her eyes were bright with gossip-hungry interest. "Something like that," I murmured, tucking the card into my pocket. I should have thrown the flowers away. Should have ignored the invitation entirely. Should have done a dozen things that would have kept me safe in my small, predictable life. Instead, I found myself standing in front of my closet that evening, staring at clothes that suddenly seemed shabby and inadequate. The only dress I owned that didn't scream struggling teacher was a simple black number I'd bought for my college graduation 3 years ago. It was elegant in its simplicity, but I'd lost weight since then from too many meals of ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, and it hung on me like it belonged to someone else. I was still debating whether to go when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The school board is considering significant budget cuts to Lincoln Elementary. Thought you should know. R.A." My blood chilled. Budget cuts meant layoffs. Layoffs meant losing the job I could barely afford to keep, but absolutely couldn't afford to lose. How did he know about school board meetings? How did he know anything about my professional life? A second text followed immediately. Dinner might present opportunities to discuss alternatives. It wasn't exactly a threat. It wasn't exactly blackmail. It was something more subtle and infinitely more dangerous. It was Riccardo Agostini letting me know that he had information I needed, influence I couldn't access on my own, and the power to make my problems disappear if I played along. I put on the black dress, The Fairmont Hotel was everything I'd imagined from the outside and more. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors so polished they looked like mirrors. Men in expensive suits escorted women dripping in jewelry, their laughter echoing off high ceilings decorated with gold leaf that probably cost more than my annual salary. I felt like an imposter, like someone would surely realize I didn't belong and ask me to leave. But the maitre d' at the Venetian room took my name with professional courtesy and led me through dining rooms filled with the kind of people I'd only seen in magazines. Ricardo was waiting at a corner table, partially hidden by shadows, but commanding the space nonetheless. He stood when he saw me approaching, and I noticed how other diners glanced his way. Some with recognition, others with the instinctive wariness that prey animals show when they sense a predator nearby. "Miss Prosper," he said, pulling out my chair with old-world courtesy. "You look beautiful." The compliment made heat crawl up my neck. I wasn't used to men like Ricardo noticing what I looked like. Wasn't used to being seen as anything other than the tired teacher in sensible shoes who couldn't quite make ends meet. "Thank you for coming," he continued, settling into his own chair with fluid grace. "I wasn't certain you would. Your text was persuasive," I replied, accepting the wine menu from a server who appeared and disappeared with practiced invisibility. Ricardo's smile was slight, acknowledging the game we were playing without quite admitting to it. "You're direct. I appreciate that quality." The dinner that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced. Ricardo ordered for both of us in fluent Italian, choosing dishes I'd never heard of, wines that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But it wasn't the luxury that unsettled me. It was the conversation. He knew things. About my degree in elementary education with a minor in child psychology. About my parents' accident 8 years ago and the medical bills that had consumed the small inheritance they'd left. About my student loans and second job and the scholarship I'd earned to Boston University. About the commendation I'd received last year for my work with at-risk children. "You've done research," I said, setting down my fork with deliberate precision. "I'm thorough about people who matter to me." "Why would I matter to you? I helped your son. That doesn't make me important." Ricardo leaned back in his chair, studying me with those unsettling blue eyes. "You're intelligent, educated, and kind. You have integrity in a world where that's increasingly rare. You chose to help a frightened child when you could have walked away. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. And that matters because Luca needs stability, guidance. Someone who understands how a child's mind works and can help him navigate a complicated world." He paused, swirling wine in his glass. His mother died 3 years ago. Since then, he's been surrounded by bodyguards and housekeepers, people who care for his physical needs, but don't understand his emotional ones. The pain in his voice when he mentioned his wife was carefully controlled, but unmistakable. This was a man who'd loved deeply and lost catastrophically, who carried that grief like a scar that never quite healed. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said quietly. "Elena was light in a dark world. When she died, that light went out for both of us." His fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his wineglass. "Luca has nightmares. He's afraid to be away from me for more than a few hours. He's brilliant, but isolated. He needs someone who can reach him. You want me to be his tutor. I want you to consider it. 3 sessions per week, 3 hours each session. The compensation would be sufficient to eliminate your student debt and provide a comfortable living wage." The offer hung in the air between us like a bridge I could choose to cross or burn. I knew I should ask questions about his business, about the dangerous world that had sent his son running through alleys in the rain. I knew I should be terrified of getting involved with a man whose very presence seemed to bend reality around his will. Instead, I found myself asking, what would I be teaching him? Academics, certainly, but more than that. How to be a child when circumstances have forced him to grow up too quickly. How to trust when trust has been dangerous. How to find joy when the world seems determined to extinguish it. The vulnerability beneath his words caught me off guard. This wasn't the controlled, calculating man who commanded rooms full of dangerous men. This was a father struggling to protect his son from shadows that never quite disappeared. "The school board meeting," I said, deflecting from emotions that felt too intimate for public spaces. "How did you know?" "I have interests in many areas of the city. education being one of them. His smile held secrets I couldn't begin to guess. Lincoln Elementary could benefit from private patronage, anonymous donations that ensure teacher positions remain funded, classroom supplies stay stocked, programs continue to operate. Quid pro quo. Help his son, and he'd help my school. Help my colleagues keep their jobs. Help children who needed every advantage they could get. This feels like coercion, I said, though the word lacked conviction. This feels like mutual benefit, he countered. I'm offering you an opportunity to do what you love while being compensated fairly for your expertise. What's coercive about that? We both knew it was more complicated than he made it sound. Men like Riccardo Agostini didn't make simple business propositions. They made investments that paid dividends in loyalty, in obligation, in debts that could be called in when convenient. But as I sat across from him in that elegant dining room, watching candlelight play across features that seemed carved from marble and shadow, I realized I was already lost. Not because of his power, or his money, or his threats, but because of the way his voice broke when he spoke about his son, because of the loneliness I recognized in his carefully controlled expression, because of the way he looked at me like I was something precious rather than something expendable. 3 months, I heard myself saying. Trial period. If it's not working for any of us, I walk away. No questions asked. Ricardo's smile was slow, satisfied, like he'd known what my answer would be before I'd spoken. 3 months, he agreed, raising his glass in a mock toast. To new beginnings. I touched my glass to his, sealing an agreement that felt more like a pact with forces I couldn't begin to understand. As he drove me home in a car that purred like a contented cat, I caught him watching me in the rearview mirror with an intensity that made my skin tingle with awareness I had no business feeling. Mary, he said as we pulled up to my building, my name sounding different in his mouth than it had 2 weeks ago. More intimate, more possessive. Yes, you're different from the others. I didn't ask what others he meant. Didn't want to know about the women who'd come before me, who'd sat in that same passenger seat and listened to promises that may or may not have been kept. Instead, I got out of the car and walked to my building without looking back, though I felt his eyes on me until I disappeared through the front door. 3 weeks into my arrangement with Ricardo, I'd grown accustomed to the rituals of entering his world. The drive through progressively wealthier neighborhoods, until Boston's gritty urban landscape gave way to manicured estates hidden behind iron gates and old money discretion. The moment of hesitation at the entrance to the Agostini compound, where cameras tracked my approach and invisible security systems processed my credentials. The transformation from Mary Prosper, struggling public school teacher, to Mary Prosper, private tutor to the heir of a criminal empire. The mansion itself still took my breath away. Colonial architecture softened by careful landscaping, windows that caught afternoon light and turned it into something precious. It looked like the kind of place where senators' wives hosted charity luncheons, not where mob bosses planned territorial disputes. Perhaps that was intentional. Luca always met me in the foyer, eager and bright-eyed, chattering about books he'd read or questions he'd thought of since our last session. In those moments, I could almost forget the armed men stationed discreetly throughout the property, the armored vehicles in the garage, the weight of secrets that hung in the air like expensive cologne. Today, he dragged me toward the library with particular enthusiasm, a leather-bound volume clutched in his small hands. Miss Mary, look what I found. It's about psychology, like what you studied. Papa said you might want to see it. The book was Jung's work on child development, first edition, probably worth more than my car. I accepted it with the reverence such a treasure deserved, running my fingers over gilded pages that contained wisdom I'd only encountered in photocopied excerpts during graduate school. Your papa has excellent taste in books, I said, settling into the window seat that had become our usual spot for lessons. He has lots of books about thinking and feelings. Says it's important to understand how people work. Luca climbed up beside me, unconsciously mimicking my posture. Are we going to talk about thinking today? We're going to practice math, remember? But understanding how people think is always useful. As we worked through multiplication tables, I found myself listening to voices drifting from other parts of the house. Men speaking in rapid Italian, their tones urgent, but controlled. Occasionally, I caught fragments in English, references to shipments, territories, arrangements that needed to be made, nothing specific enough to be truly incriminating, but sufficient to remind me that this beautiful home was the headquarters of operations I preferred not to examine too closely. "Miss Mary?" Luca's voice pulled me back to the present. "Why do you look worried sometimes when Papa's friends visit?" The question caught me off guard. Children were more perceptive than adults often realized, especially children who'd been forced to develop survival instincts early. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions," I said carefully. "It can sound serious, even when everything is fine. Papa makes difficult decisions every day. Uncle Tony says it's because Papa has to take care of lots of people, not just me." The innocent acceptance in his voice made my chest tight. This was his normal, a world where difficult decisions meant life and death, where taking care of people required methods that couldn't be discussed in polite society. We were reviewing his reading comprehension when Ricardo appeared in the doorway. I'd grown sensitive to his presence over the past weeks, some primitive awareness that made my skin prickle when he was near. Today, something was different. Tension radiated from him in waves I could almost taste. "Luca, go find Maria in the kitchen. She's making your favorite cookies." Luca's face lit up, but he hesitated, looking between his father and me with the intuition children possess for detecting undercurrents adults prefer to hide. "Is everything okay, Papa?" Ricardo's expression softened as he crouched to his son's level, hands gentle on small shoulders. "Everything is fine, little man. I just need to speak with Miss Mary about your progress." Grown-up talk, very boring. Only after Luca had skipped away did Ricardo's careful composure crack slightly. He moved to the window, staring out at grounds that probably cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. "We need to talk," he said without turning around. "About Luca's education. About the fact that you're in danger because of me." The words hit like physical blows. I set down the book I'd been holding, hands suddenly unsteady. "What kind of danger?" "The kind that comes with proximity to my family. There are people who see anyone close to us as leverage, as weak points they can exploit." His reflection in the window looked haunted. My wife understood this. Elena was raised in this world, knew the rules, accepted the risks. "You didn't choose this. I chose to work for you. You chose to help a child. There's a difference." He turned then, blue eyes burning with something that might have been regret. "The Torino family has been making inquiries about you. About your schedule, your routines, your vulnerabilities." Ice formed in my stomach. The Torinos? Old enemies. They've been testing boundaries lately, pushing against territories that have been settled for years. Using you against me would be efficient. The clinical way he discussed threats to my life made everything feel surreal, like we were analyzing a chess problem rather than talking about people who might want to hurt me. "What does that mean exactly?" Ricardo was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried weight that made each word feel final. "It means you can't go home tonight, or any night until this is resolved. You can't just decide that. I can't just let you die." The raw emotion in his voice startled both of us. "Not because of me. Not because you were kind to my son." We stared at each other across the elegant library, and I realized this conversation was a turning point. A moment where I could still back away from the precipice, could still choose safety over whatever dangerous territory we were approaching. "Elena," I said quietly. "Your wife. How did she die?" His face went carefully blank. "Car accident." "That's not what you told me before. You said she was killed." "The Torinos arranged the accident, made it look random, unavoidable. She was coming home from Luca's school play." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "She never even saw it coming." The pain in his voice was like touching a live wire. This wasn't abstract danger we were discussing. This was personal history, written in blood and loss. "They killed your wife to get to you. They killed my wife to send a message that nothing I loved was safe, that they could take anything, anyone, whenever they chose." His eyes met mine, and I saw years of carefully controlled rage burning there. "I won't let them do it again." Before I could respond, the sound of screaming metal and shattering glass erupted from somewhere outside the house. Car alarms began wailing, men shouted in multiple languages, and the peaceful afternoon exploded into chaos. Ricardo was moving before I'd fully processed what was happening, pulling me away from the windows, speaking rapidly into a phone that had appeared in his hand. "Enzo, talk to me." "How many? Where's the boy?" The library door burst open and Antonio rushed in, his usually composed demeanor replaced by grim efficiency. "3 cars, automatic weapons. They're not trying to get in, just making noise. Distraction. Luca? Safe room with Maria. Building's locked down." Ricardo nodded, then turned to me with an expression that was part apology, part command. "Mary, I need you to listen very carefully. Antonio is going to take you to a secure location. You don't leave his sight. You don't ask questions. You do exactly what he tells you. What about you? I'm going to end this." The words were spoken with such cold finality that I understood this wasn't bravado or anger. This was a man who'd built an empire on decisive action, who'd survived in a world where hesitation meant death. "Ricardo," I said, his name feeling foreign on my tongue. "Be careful." Something shifted in his face at the sound of his name from my lips. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the silver threads in his dark hair. "When this is over," he said quietly, "we're going to talk about what happens next, what we both want to happen next." Before I could ask what he meant, his mouth was on mine. The kiss was fierce, desperate, tasting of coffee and barely controlled violence. It lasted only seconds, but it seared itself into my memory with indelible permanence. Then Antonio was pulling me toward a hidden panel in the library wall, and Ricardo was striding toward whatever confrontation awaited him, and I was falling through a trapdoor into a world where normal rules no longer applied. As we descended into what appeared to be a sophisticated bunker system beneath the mansion, I touched my lips where I could still taste him, where I could still feel the weight of a promise that might have been goodbye. Above us, the sounds of conflict grew more distant, muffled by steel and concrete, and the weight of choices that could never be undone. In the darkness, I finally understood that I was no longer Mary Prosper, elementary school teacher who happened to know a dangerous man. I was Mary Prosper, the woman Riccardo Agostini had claimed with a kiss that tasted like ownership and protection, and something far more dangerous than either. The safe house was a testament to paranoid luxury. Situated in Beacon Hill behind ivy-covered walls that looked historical but concealed state-of-the-art security systems, it felt like stepping into a museum where someone happened to live. Persian rugs over hardwood floors that gleamed like mirrors, artwork that belonged in galleries, furniture that whispered of old money and older secrets. I'd been there a week, 7 days of pacing elegant rooms while trying to process how completely my life had imploded. Antonio had explained the situation with military precision. The Torino attack had been a feint, designed to test response times and identify weaknesses. Intelligence suggested they were planning something larger, more permanent. Until the threat was neutralized, I was effectively a prisoner in a gilded cage. The files arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who looked like he could bench press a small car. Antonio accepted them with grim efficiency, his face growing darker as he scanned the contents. "Miss Prosper," he said, settling across from me in the sitting room, "we need to discuss your parents." Ice formed in my chest. What about my parents? They died in a car accident 8 years ago. That's what you were told. What everyone was told. He opened the file, revealing photographs and documents that made my vision blur at the edges. The accident was real. The cause wasn't what you think. I stared at police reports, insurance documents, witness statements that had been buried so deep they might as well have been fiction. My father's name appeared repeatedly in connection with underground poker games, private clubs where the stakes went far beyond money. He gambled, I whispered, the words feeling like glass in my throat. More than that, he borrowed from the wrong people when the gambling debts got too high. Vincent Torino specifically. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Vincent Torino, the same family that was now hunting me because of my connection to Ricardo. The brake lines in your parents' car were severed. Antonio continued with the gentle ruthlessness of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis, made to look like mechanical failure. Vincent's calling card, back when he was still establishing his reputation. My hands shook as I processed this information. Ricardo knew. When he investigated me, He found this. He did. And he didn't tell me. Betrayal tasted like copper pennies in my mouth. He let me get involved with his family, knowing my parents were murdered by the same people who killed his wife. Antonio's expression softened slightly. He wanted to tell you. I was in the room when he argued with himself about it for hours. But how do you tell someone their entire understanding of their parents' death is a lie? How do you explain that the people who destroyed their family are the same ones who might destroy them? By telling the truth. I stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked a garden designed to look natural, but maintained with obsessive precision. By giving me the choice to walk away before I got in too deep. Are you in too deep? The question stopped me cold. Was I? A month ago, I would have said no. I was just a tutor, a temporary arrangement, easily severed when the contract expired. But somewhere between learning Luca's favorite books and watching Ricardo's face soften when he looked at his son, between understanding the loneliness that drove his choices and feeling his mouth claim mine with desperate hunger, the answer had changed. Yes, I admitted quietly. I'm in too deep. My phone buzzed against the coffee table, Ricardo's name lighting up the screen. I'd been avoiding his calls for 2 days, ever since Antonio had delivered his bombshell. Now, seeing his name, I felt the familiar tug of attraction warring with newly awakened fury. I answered on the 4th ring. What do you want, Ricardo? To see you. To explain. His voice carried exhaustion I'd never heard before. Rough edges that spoke of sleepless nights and complicated decisions. Antonio told me about the conversation. Antonio told you I found out you've been lying to me since the day we met. I wasn't lying. I was protecting you from information that couldn't change what happened but could destroy what we're building. We're not building anything. I'm a tutor you hired. That's all. Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. If that's all this is, he said finally, then why haven't you terminated the contract? Why are you still in my safe house instead of demanding to go home? Because home felt like a foreign concept now. Because my tiny apartment seemed impossibly small after weeks of living in his world. Because somewhere in the elegant rooms and dangerous conversations, I'd stopped being a visitor and started being something else entirely. I want to see Luca, I said instead of answering his question. Come home then. Home. The word hit like a physical blow. When had I started thinking of his mansion as home? I can't trust you. Then trust this. I need you. Not just for Luca, though he asks about you every day. I need you in ways I'm not sure I understand yet. Ways that have nothing to do with tutoring and everything to do with the fact that you make me remember what it feels like to want something beyond survival. The raw honesty in his voice made my chest tight. This wasn't the controlled, calculating man who commanded rooms full of dangerous people. This was someone stripped bare by circumstances he couldn't manipulate or intimidate into compliance. Ricardo, I'm coming to get you. Don't. I need time to think. You've had a week to think. Time to decide if you can forgive me for trying to protect you from truths that would only cause pain. Time to decide if what's between us is worth fighting for. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering when my feelings had become so tangled with his that separating them felt impossible. 40 minutes later, I heard the rumble of engines outside the safe house. Through the curtains, I watched Ricardo emerge from a black sedan, flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize. He wore a navy suit that hugged his frame like armor, but his face showed strain that no amount of expensive tailoring could hide. Antonio let him in without ceremony, the 2 men exchanging looks that carried years of shared history and unspoken understanding. Leave us, Ricardo said quietly, his eyes finding mine across the room. When we were alone, he didn't approach immediately. Instead, he stood by the fireplace, hands in his pockets, studying me like he was trying to memorize details he might not see again. You look tired, he said finally. You look like hell. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Luca won't eat. Says the food tastes wrong without you there to remind him to use his napkin. He's been sleeping in my room every night, afraid something will happen to me like what happened to his mother. The guilt was immediate and sharp. In my anger over Ricardo's deception, I'd forgotten about the little boy who'd already lost too much. I didn't mean to abandon him. You didn't abandon him. You did exactly what any rational person would do when they discovered they'd been manipulated by someone they trusted. Have I been? Manipulated? Ricardo moved closer then, close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the silver threads in his hair, could count the exhaustion lines around his eyes. From the beginning, yes. I investigated you before offering the job. I researched your financial situation, your vulnerabilities, your psychological profile. I identified exactly what you needed to hear to make you agree to work for me. Each admission hit like a slap. And the personal stuff? The dinners, the conversations, the way you look at me? The way I look at you is the one thing I can't control or calculate or manipulate. His hand rose to touch my face, fingers tracing the line of my cheek with reverent gentleness. Everything else was strategy. That is something else entirely. What is it? Dangerous. Inconvenient. Possibly the stupidest thing I've ever allowed myself to feel. His thumb brushed across my lower lip, and I felt my resolve wavering like smoke in wind. It's also the only real thing in my life besides my son. Before I could respond, his mouth was on mine. And this kiss was different from the desperate claiming in his library. This was persuasion, seduction, a slow burn that made my knees weak and my principles negotiable. When we broke apart, I was breathing hard, my hands fisted in his shirt like I was drowning, and he was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid. "Come home," he whispered against my lips. "Come home and help me keep Lucas safe. Help me figure out what this is between us. Help me be something other than what this world made me." I wanted to say yes. Wanted to fall into his arms and let him carry me back to his mansion where danger and luxury intertwined like lovers. But trust, once broken, doesn't heal quickly. "I need guarantees," I said. "No more lies. No more manipulation. If we do this, if I come back, it has to be real. What's real is that I'm falling in love with you," he said, the words hitting me like lightning. "What's real is that you're the first person in years who makes me want to be better than what I am. What's real is that if something happens to you, I'll burn the entire city down to make it right. Love." He'd said love. And despite everything, despite the lies and manipulation and the fact that he was a criminal who solved problems with violence, I realized I was falling too. "One more chance," I heard myself saying. "But Ricardo, if you lie to me again, if you manipulate me or hide things that affect my safety, I walk away, and I don't look back." His smile was relief and promise, and something that looked dangerously like devotion. One more chance is all I need. The warehouse smelled of rust and abandonment, decades of maritime commerce reduced to shadows and echoes. I came awake slowly, consciousness returning in painful fragments. Wrists bound behind me with zip ties that cut into skin when I moved. Head throbbing from whatever they'd used to knock me unconscious. Luca's terrified whimpering somewhere in the darkness beside me. "Shh, sweetheart," I whispered, forcing my voice to stay calm despite the terror clawing at my chest. "I'm here. Everything's going to be okay." My eyes adjusted to reveal a space that had once processed goods from around the world, now reduced to empty concrete and broken dreams. Afternoon light filtered through grimy windows, casting everything in sepia tones that made the situation feel like a nightmare I might wake up from, except I wouldn't wake up. This was real. This was the consequence of loving a man whose enemies saw kindness as weakness to exploit. "Miss Mary?" Luca's voice was small, shattered. "I'm scared." "I know, baby. But your papa is very smart and very determined. He's going to find us." 3 men lounged near the entrance, assault rifles casual in their hands like accessories to expensive suits. The Torino soldiers looked bored, like kidnapping was just another Tuesday afternoon activity. Their leader, a heavy-set man with scarred knuckles, kept checking his phone with growing impatience. "Boss wants confirmation they got the message," he muttered to his companions. "Agostini should have called by now." One of the others, younger with hungry eyes, gestured toward us. "Maybe we should send a finger or something. Show him we're serious." "Nobody touches them until Vincent gives orders," the leader snapped. "We need them alive for leverage." I processed this information through the lens of educational psychology, analyzing behavioral patterns, group dynamics, power structures. These men weren't professional killers driven by ideology or personal vendetta. They were employees following directives, susceptible to confusion, misdirection, doubt. During my 2 months with Ricardo's family, I'd absorbed more than academic tutoring. I'd observed how Antonio managed subordinates through carefully calibrated authority, how Ricardo commanded loyalty through strategic mixture of fear and respect, how family meetings operated like corporate boardrooms where the wrong answer could be fatal. "Luca," I whispered, pitching my voice below their conversation range. "Remember the game we played with Morse code patterns? When you tap your foot against mine, count to 3, then tap twice more. Keep doing that rhythm." His small foot found mine, and I felt the tentative pressure. 1, 2, 3. Tap, tap. 1, 2, 3. Tap, tap. Meanwhile, I began working on the psychological components of our situation. These men expected us to be helpless victims, cowering in fear until Ricardo arrived with whatever ransom Vincent demanded. They weren't prepared for active resistance, especially not from an elementary school teacher who'd spent years managing classroom dynamics and troubled children. "Excuse me," I called out, using the firm but polite tone that commanded attention in parent conferences. "Could I get some water for the boy?" The leader looked over with mild surprise. Most kidnapping victims probably didn't make polite requests. "You're not exactly in a position to make demands, lady." "I'm not demanding. I'm asking. He's 6 years old and he's dehydrated. Surely you have children of your own." Something flickered across his face. Discomfort, maybe. Or recognition. Vincent didn't say anything about keeping the kid comfortable. Vincent Torino has a reputation for being smart, strategic. A sick child reduces leverage. A healthy child demonstrates your professionalism. I was gambling on his pride, on the peculiar honor code that governed criminal enterprises. These men saw themselves as professionals, not monsters who tortured children for entertainment. The leader studied me for a long moment, then nodded to the younger man. "Get her some water. Small bottle." While he was gone, I continued Luca's Morse code lesson, feeling his small foot maintaining the rhythm against mine. The pattern wasn't random. I was teaching him to tap out SOS in Morse code, over and over, loud enough that sensitive surveillance equipment might pick up the sound through concrete and steel. Ricardo had mentioned the sophisticated tracking capabilities his security team employed. Voice recognition, heartbeat monitors, satellite thermal imaging. If they were searching methodically, they'd eventually detect pattern anomalies in audio feeds from industrial areas near the harbor. "Miss Mary," Luca whispered when the men weren't looking. "Are the bad men going to hurt Papa?" "Your Papa has been dealing with bad men his whole life, sweetheart. He knows how to stay safe." What I didn't say was that Ricardo's safety mattered less to him than ours. A man who'd lost his wife to these same enemies wouldn't hesitate to trade his life for his son's. The knowledge sat in my chest, like lead. Hours passed. The light from the windows shifted. Afternoon becoming evening, becoming night. Our captors grew restless, making phone calls that seemed to produce no satisfactory answers. Vincent, apparently, was proving difficult to reach. "Maybe he's dead," the young one suggested hopefully. "Maybe Agostini got to him first." "Shut up," the leader snapped. "Vincent doesn't die easy." But doubt was creeping into their voices, uncertainty that I could exploit. "You know," I said conversationally, "Riccardo Agostini didn't become the most powerful man in Boston by being predictable. Whatever Vincent told you to expect, whatever timeline he gave you, he was probably wrong." The leader turned to glare at me. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're sitting in a warehouse with 2 hostages, no communication from your boss, and no exit strategy. It means every minute you stay here increases the chances that Ricardo's people triangulate your position." I was bluffing, mostly, but confidence was a weapon I'd learned to wield in classrooms full of skeptical adolescents. Project certainty, and people believe you know something they don't. "Lady, you don't know what you're talking about. I know that scared men make stupid decisions. I know that Vincent Torino has a reputation for abandoning subordinates when operations go sideways. I know that Ricardo pays better than your current employer." The younger man looked interested despite himself. "How much better?" "Shut up, Tony," the leader warned. But the seed was planted. Doubt, once introduced, grew like cancer in criminal organizations built on fear and greed. Around midnight, Everything changed. The building's power died without warning. Emergency lighting casting everything in hellish red. Luca pressed closer to me, his small body trembling with exhaustion and terror. Then I heard it. The distinctive sound of tactical boots on concrete, moving with professional precision through darkened corridors. Ricardo's people had found us. "Stay down," I whispered to Luca, using my body to shield him as much as possible. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes strobing through the darkness like deadly fireworks. Our captors scrambled for defensive positions, but they were outmanned and outmaneuvered by opponents who'd planned this assault with military efficiency. The battle lasted less than 3 minutes. When the shooting stopped, 2 of the Torino men were dead, and the third was bleeding from a shoulder wound, zip-tied and awaiting interrogation. Antonio emerged from the shadows first, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, but his eyes sharp with professional satisfaction. "Miss Prosper, are you injured?" "We're okay," I managed, though my voice shook with adrenaline and relief. Then Ricardo was there, kneeling beside us, hands gentle as he checked us for injuries. In the red emergency lighting, his face looked like it had been carved from stone in fury. "Papa!" Luca threw himself into his father's arms, sobbing with the complete abandon of a child who'd been too scared to cry during captivity. Ricardo held his son with one arm, while his free hand cupped my face, thumb brushing away tears I hadn't realized I was crying. "You're safe," he whispered, and I heard years of barely controlled terror in his voice. "You're both safe." Enzo appeared with bolt cutters, freeing my wrists from the zip ties that had left angry red marks on my skin. Ricardo helped me stand, his arm around my waist, solid and warm and protective. "How did you find us?" I asked. "The Morse code," Antonio replied with something that might have been admiration. Luca's foot tapping. Our surveillance equipment picked up the SOS pattern and triangulated the source. I looked down at the little boy in his father's arms, amazed by his courage, his ability to maintain focus under circumstances that would have broken most adults. "Good job, sweetheart," I said, touching his hair gently. "You saved us both." As we left the warehouse, Ricardo's arm never left my waist, like he was afraid I might disappear if he let go. Behind us, his men cleaned up evidence with the efficiency of long practice. "Vincent?" I asked. "Won't be a problem anymore," Ricardo replied, his voice carrying finality that brooked no questions. In the car, Luca fell asleep between us, exhausted by terror and relief. Ricardo's hand found mine in the darkness, fingers intertwining with desperate strength. "Mary," he said quietly, "I can't do this anymore. Can't live with the constant fear that someone will use you against me. Can't watch you and Luca pay for my choices." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that loving you is the most dangerous thing I've ever done, and also the most necessary." His words hung in the air between us like a bridge I could choose to cross or burn. In the past few hours, I'd seen what his world cost, but I'd also seen what he was willing to sacrifice to protect the people he loved. "Then let's make it worth the danger," I said, squeezing his hand. When he kissed me this time, it tasted like promises and homecoming and the kind of love that builds empires from ashes. 3 months had passed since the warehouse. 3 months of integration into Ricardo's world, where I'd evolved from outsider to insider, from victim to strategist. The transformation hadn't been sudden or dramatic. It had been a gradual awakening to capabilities I'd never known I possessed. Skills honed through careful observation and psychological training that proved surprisingly applicable to criminal enterprises. The message arrived on a Tuesday evening while Ricardo was reviewing territory reports in his study. Antonio brought it personally, his usual composure replaced by grim anticipation. "Vincent Torino wants to meet," he announced without preamble. "Neutral ground. Says it's time to end this properly." I looked up from the educational psychology journal I'd been reading, an article about manipulation techniques in high-stress environments that had proven remarkably relevant to my new circumstances. "It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Ricardo replied without looking up from his papers. "The question is whether it's a trap we can turn to our advantage." Over the months, I'd learned to read the subtle signs of his mood, the way his pen moved across paper with slightly more force when he was calculating violence, the precise stillness that settled over him when multiple scenarios played out simultaneously in his mind. Tonight, He was planning war. Where does he want to meet? I asked. Pier 47. Tomorrow night. Midnight. Antonio's expression suggested he'd rather wrestle sharks than attend this meeting. Says he wants to discuss territorial agreements, compensation for recent losses. Compensation! Ricardo's laugh was winter ice scraping concrete. He kidnaps my family and wants compensation. I closed the journal, focusing entirely on the conversation. In 3 months, I'd absorbed enough about territorial dynamics to understand what Vincent was really proposing. This wasn't about money or territory lines. This was about honor, about reputation, about the kind of public humiliation that destroyed criminal empires from within. He's not expecting you to agree to compensation, I said quietly. He's expecting you to refuse, to get angry, to make a mistake that gives him justification for whatever he's really planning. Both men turned to me with the focused attention I'd learned to recognize as respect. My insights into psychological manipulation had proven valuable in ways my education had never intended. Explain, Ricardo said. I moved to his desk, spreading out a city map with territorial markings that looked like a chessboard designed by Napoleon. Vincent knows you won't pay him. He's counting on it. But he also knows you can't refuse to meet without looking weak to the other families. So he's created a situation where any response serves his purposes. Except he's not accounting for variables he doesn't understand. He thinks in terms of traditional power structures, violence, intimidation, territorial control. But you have assets he can't calculate. Ricardo's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Such as a woman with a master's degree in educational psychology who spent 3 months studying criminal organizational behavior. Such as someone who understands group dynamics and leadership manipulation in ways that don't typically appear in mob strategy sessions. I leaned over the map, pointing to various locations. Vincent expects you to come armed, angry, ready for confrontation. He expects Antonio, Enzo, maybe 6 other men in a show of force. He's prepared for that scenario. What's he not prepared for? Psychological warfare, misdirection based on behavioral prediction models. Someone who can read micro-expressions and voice stress patterns to determine when he's lying, when he's vulnerable, when he's about to make the mistake that gives you the advantage. Antonio looked skeptical. Miss Mary, with respect, this isn't a classroom. No, it's not. It's a high-stakes negotiation between competing leadership structures. The principles are remarkably similar. I turned to Ricardo. Let me come with you. Absolutely not. Listen to me first. Vincent's psychology profile, based on everything you've told me about his past behavior, suggests someone who compensates for deep insecurity through displays of dominance. He needs to feel superior to validate his leadership position. And he's not prepared to be analyzed by someone trained in recognizing and exploiting those psychological patterns. While he's focused on you as the primary threat, I can be reading his tells, identifying his pressure points, looking for the moment when his need to dominate overrides his strategic thinking. Ricardo was quiet for a long moment, that calculating stillness settling over him like armor. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than letting him control the narrative. More dangerous than walking into a situation where you're reacting instead of directing. I pulled out my phone, showing him an article I'd bookmarked. Hostage negotiation techniques, psychological pressure mapping, de-escalation strategies that can be reversed into manipulation tools. I've been studying this for months, not just as academic curiosity but as survival skills. Mary, 3 months ago, you told me I was intelligent, educated, and kind. You said I had integrity in a world where that was rare. Those qualities didn't disappear when I chose to stay with you. They evolved. I moved closer to him, close enough to see the war between protection and pragmatism playing out in his eyes. I'm not asking to be in the line of fire. I'm asking to be your psychological intelligence operative, to read the room in ways your men can't, to identify opportunities for advantage that traditional tactics might miss. Antonio cleared his throat. Boss, it could work. Vincent's old school. He won't see a woman as a strategic threat until it's too late. If something happens to you, Ricardo began. If something happens to you, Luca loses the only parent he has left, and I lose the man I love. We're all at risk regardless. But this way, We're at risk with better intelligence. The word love hung in the air between us. I'd said it without calculation, without planning, but with complete truth. In 3 months, somewhere between tactical discussions and bedtime stories for Luca, between learning to navigate family politics and discovering the gentle man hidden beneath Ricardo's dangerous exterior, I'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love. His hand cupped my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone with familiar tenderness. If we do this, you follow orders without question. If I say run, you run. If I say hide, you disappear. No heroics, no psychological analysis that puts you in harm's way. Agreed. And after this is over, after Vincent is no longer a threat, we talk about what comes next. About making this official, making you family in ways that go beyond employment contracts and protection arrangements. My heart stuttered. Official? I'm asking you to marry me, Mary Prosper. Not because of convenience or strategy or any other calculated reason. Because I can't imagine a future that doesn't include you. And because I want the whole world to know that you chose to be here. Chose to be mine. The proposal hit like lightning. Unexpected and transformative. In the middle of planning what might be our last confrontation with Vincent Torino, Ricardo was offering me forever. Yes, I whispered, the word barely audible but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. He kissed me then, soft and reverent, like I was something precious he was afraid of breaking. All right then, he said against my lips. Let's go end this war so we can start our life. The next 24 hours passed in controlled preparation. Ricardo's men briefed me on signal protocols, escape routes, contingency plans. I studied everything they had on Vincent Torino. Psychological profiles based on witness reports, behavioral patterns from previous confrontations, weaknesses that could be exploited under pressure. By the time we left for Pier 47, I understood my role with academic precision. I would observe, analyze, and when the moment presented itself, I would give Ricardo the psychological leverage he needed to turn Vincent's trap into his downfall. The pier was exactly what you'd expect for a midnight meeting between crime bosses. Shadows and fog, the sound of water against pylons, the smell of salt and diesel fuel. Vincent had arrived first. 3 cars positioned strategically, men visible in the darkness like pieces on a chessboard. Remember? Ricardo said as our convoy approached. You're my secret weapon. Act like decoration until it's time to strike. I nodded, checking the small recording device hidden in my jacket. Whatever happened tonight, we'd have evidence. Vincent Torino stood at the end of the pier, silhouetted against harbor lights like a villain from central casting. Older than Ricardo, heavier, with the kind of face that had seen too much violence and not enough conscience. As we walked toward him, I began my psychological assessment, cataloging details that would inform my strategy. The way he stood with feet planted too wide, overcompensating for perceived weakness. The repetitive gesture of adjusting his cufflinks, a nervous tell disguised as grooming. The careful positioning of his men, suggesting someone who needed visible proof of authority to feel secure. Agostini, Vincent called out as we approached. Good of you to come. And you brought your school teacher. How domestic. The dismissive tone was exactly what I'd expected. He saw me as irrelevant, ornamental, beneath strategic consideration. Perfect. Vincent, Ricardo replied with controlled neutrality. You wanted to talk. Let's talk. As the 2 men began their careful dance of negotiation and threat, I settled into observation mode, analyzing every word, every gesture, every micro-expression that revealed the psychological landscape beneath Vincent's surface confidence. And I began to plan his destruction. 18 months later, I stood in the nursery of our Beacon Hill mansion, watching afternoon light paint rainbows across walls the color of fresh cream. My hand rested on the curve of my belly, 6 months pregnant with the child who would grow up knowing nothing but love and protection, surrounded by guards who looked like businessmen, and a father who'd transformed an empire built on fear into something resembling legitimacy. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. After Vincent Torino's final miscalculation at Pier 47, when psychological pressure and strategic manipulation had led him to reveal his backup plan to eliminate Ricardo's entire family, giving us the justification and evidence needed to end the war permanently, Riccardo had begun the careful process of evolution. Mrs. Agostini? Maria's voice carried the gentle respect she'd shown me since the wedding 6 months ago. A ceremony that had been both intimate family gathering and political statement. The most powerful man in Boston choosing to share his empire with a former elementary school teacher had sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld that were still reverberating. Yes, Maria? Mr. Agostini is in his study with the architects. He asked if you could join them. I smiled, running my hand over the mahogany crib that had been crafted by artisans who probably had no idea their work would shelter the heir to a reformed criminal dynasty. Tell him I'll be right there. The study that had once been command central for territory wars and strategic violence had been transformed into something that looked more like a corporate boardroom, crossed with a gentleman's library. Maps of Boston still covered one wall, but now they showed legitimate business interests. Restaurants, hotels, real estate developments, educational foundations. Riccardo looked up as I entered, his eyes softening in the way that still made my heart stutter after all these months. At 39, power had refined him rather than corrupted him further. The dangerous edge remained, would always remain, but it was tempered now by something I'd helped him discover, the possibility of building rather than just controlling. Mary, he said, rising to pull out a chair beside his desk. Perfect timing. We're finalizing the plans for the new school. I settled beside him, studying the architectural drawings spread across polished wood. The Lincoln Elementary renovation project had been my idea, my way of ensuring that children in my old neighborhood would have access to resources their parents could never afford. Riccardo had embraced the concept with the same strategic intensity he'd once applied to territory expansion. The library wing looks beautiful, I observed, tracing the clean lines with my finger. And the psychological counseling center? Fully funded, fully staffed. Dr. Martinez has already hired 3 additional therapists specializing in childhood trauma. His hand covered mine where it rested on the drawings. Your old principal called it an educational miracle. I leaned back in the chair, watching him discuss square footage and program budgets with the architects. This was the man I'd fallen in love with. Not just the dangerous criminal who'd commanded through fear, but the strategist who could envision comprehensive solutions to complex problems. He'd simply redirected those abilities toward construction, rather than destruction. The Agostini Foundation will establish similar programs in 12 other schools over the next 5 years, he was explaining to the architects. My wife has identified specific neighborhoods where intervention could have maximum impact. My wife. Even after 6 months, the title carried weight that went beyond legal documents. In Riccardo's world, wives weren't just partners. They were extensions of power, symbols of legitimacy, proof that even men who'd built empires on violence could evolve into something approaching respectable. After the architects left, Riccardo pulled me into his arms with the possessive gentleness that had become his signature. How are you feeling? You look tired. I'm growing a human being. Tired comes with the territory. I settled against his chest, breathing in the scent of expensive cologne and subtle power that would always mean safety to me. But happy. Incredibly happy. Good. His lips brushed the top of my head. Because I have news that should make you even happier. Oh? The Justice Department has officially closed their investigation into family activities. No charges, no ongoing surveillance, no restrictions on business operations. His voice carried satisfaction that went deeper than mere legal victory. We're officially legitimate. I pulled back to look at him, searching his face for any trace of regret about the path we'd chosen. The transition from criminal empire to legitimate business consortium had required sacrifices. Former associates who couldn't adapt to legal methods, territorial agreements that had been dissolved rather than enforced through violence, streams of income that had been abandoned rather than legitimized. Any regrets? I asked. About choosing legality over power? About choosing you over everything I used to be? His smile was the one he reserved for moments when we were alone, when the masks of public performance could be set aside. Never. Not for a single second. He led me to the window that overlooked gardens, where Luca, now 8 years old, was playing with the golden retriever we'd adopted last spring. The boy had grown into his intelligence, his natural curiosity channeled into advanced academic programs and carefully supervised social activities. He called me Mama now, had for months, the title granted with the casual acceptance of childhood but carrying emotional weight that still brought tears to my eyes. "He's been asking when his little sister will be old enough to play soccer," Ricardo said, following my gaze. "Sister?" "The ultrasound results came back this morning. Dr. Peterson called while you were napping." His hand moved to my belly, fingers spread protectively across the curve where our daughter grew. A girl, perfectly healthy, developing exactly as she should. A daughter, our daughter. The child who would grow up in a world her father had reformed, who would inherit an empire built on education and legitimate business, rather than fear and violence. "What should we name her?" I asked. I was thinking Elena, after her grandmother. The suggestion caught me off guard, emotion tightening my throat. Elena had been his first wife, Luca's mother, the woman whose death had nearly destroyed both father and son. Naming our daughter after her felt like completion, like honoring the past while embracing the future. "Elena Agostini," I said, testing the sound. "I love it. Elena Mary Agostini," he corrected. "She should carry part of you too." We stood like that for a long time, watching Luca play in gardens that had been designed for beauty rather than security, planning a future that felt impossibly bright compared to the darkness we'd emerged from. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked eventually. "The power, the fear, the way people used to defer to you without question?" Ricardo was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the thoroughness he applied to all serious inquiries. "I miss the simplicity of it sometimes. When problems could be solved with violence and loyalty was guaranteed through intimidation. But I don't miss the constant vigilance, the certainty that everyone around me was either plotting against me or terrified of me." He turned me in his arms, hands gentle on my face. "I don't miss being the kind of man who could only hold on to love through fear. I don't miss being someone you couldn't trust completely. And now? Now I'm a man who builds schools instead of burning bridges, who solves problems through negotiation instead of elimination, who can sleep peacefully because the people I love are safe, not because they're terrified, but because they choose to be here." As evening approached, we gathered for dinner in the formal dining room that had been the site of so many strategic meetings during our early months together. Now it hosted family meals, homework sessions, conversations about Luca's school projects, and Elena's impending arrival. "Miss Mary, Mama," Luca corrected himself with the careful precision of childhood. "Will you help me with my science presentation tomorrow?" "Of course, sweetheart. What's the topic?" "Psychological behavioral patterns in social groups. I want to talk about how people make decisions when they're part of a team versus when they're alone." Ricardo and I exchanged glances across the table. Even at 8, Luca was displaying analytical abilities that suggested he might follow his own path into the complex world of human behavior and social dynamics. "That sounds fascinating," I said. "We'll work on it after dinner." Later, after Luca had been tucked into bed with promises about the presentation and stories about his future sister, Ricardo and I sat in the library that had been the site of our first real conversation. The room had been redecorated since then, dangerous artifacts replaced with family photographs and children's artwork, but it remained the heart of our home. "I have something for you," Ricardo said, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "It's not my birthday. It's the anniversary of the night Vincent died, the night we officially ended the old life and began building this one." The box contained a pendant, elegant and understated, with a small diamond surrounded by white gold, shaped like a key. "The key to what?" I asked as he fastened the chain around my neck. "To everything. To the future we're building, to the family we're creating, to the empire we've transformed." His fingers lingered at the nape of my neck, touch sending familiar shivers down my spine. "To my heart, which has been yours since the night you took in a frightened child without asking questions." I turned in his arms, marveling again at the transformation that had brought us to this moment. The dangerous man who'd once commanded through fear had become someone who ruled through love, respect, and strategic brilliance applied to legitimate purposes. "I love you," I said, the words carrying the weight of everything we'd overcome and everything we were building together. "I love you too, Mrs. Agostini. Today, tomorrow, and for every day of the empire we're going to leave our children." As he kissed me, soft and reverent in the room where our story had truly begun. I could hear the future calling. Elena's first steps, Luca's graduation, family dinners in the mansion that had become a home, board meetings for the foundation that would educate thousands of children. Quiet moments like this one when the weight of the past gave way to the promise of tomorrow. I'd been Mary Prosper, struggling teacher who'd saved a lost child in the rain. Now, I was Mary Agostini, queen of an empire built on love instead of fear, architect of a legacy that would outlast us both. And I had never been happier to be wrong about where life would take me. Outside, Boston glittered with possibilities, and inside our home, the future grew beneath my heart, while the man I loved planned ways to make the world better for the children who would inherit everything we'd built together. The rain that had brought us together seemed like a blessing now, a gift that had transformed two broken people into architects of something beautiful and lasting and true.